Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. The thing I'm really interested in is how do we create organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people. This podcast has been running since January 2011, and so we have a big archive to explore. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. Before we get into the interview, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to all of the folks at CGS for sponsoring my podcast this month. Now, CGS is a company you might not have heard of, but they have been delivering brand building and customer experiences for 40 years for global brands that you will definitely have heard of. Over that time, they have developed deep expertise in both outsourcing and technology, so you should definitely pay attention to what they have to say. On that note, they've recently put together a free ebook and video that I'd like to point you to. It's called The Transformative Power of Generative AI and ChatGPT, and has been authored by CGS's Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer, John Samuel. It's a really comprehensive guide and is designed to deliver insights, summarize research, and also inspire creative problem solving. So do check out the link to the ebook and video in the show notes. Now, let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Nate Sanders, who is the co-founder and CEO of Artifact, the customer experience forecasting company. Well, that's what they call themselves. And we'll find out a bit more about what they're all about kind of in a minute. But hey, Nate, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. Now, Nate, before we get into the meat in the sandwich, as it were, or the filling in the sandwich, can you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on you and the work that you do and Artifact?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent my career in product design, product leadership roles inside of technology companies, and have built, I think, the backbone of my career around the principles of human-centered design. Just very passionate about that process of using empathy as a tool to be able to use people's experiences and understandings of what's going on in the world around them to build great products. And that's been a really successful method for me. And throughout my process of building technology products over the last 10 years, I started to see this kind of repeated pain point throughout my different shops that I was at and different experiences I was having, that we were always doing an enormous amount of work to synthesize unstructured qualitative data in some way, whether that was meeting with other stakeholders or, our customer interviews, whatever it might be. And just became very passionate about solving this pain point of how do you make sense not only of the voice of the customer data that's across the entire business, but also all of the customer data. So Artifact's mission is really centered around how do we take all of this really important data about the customer and their experience and use it to be able to help companies understand, predict, forecast what's important to the customers so that they can get in front of those issues, solve them proactively.
Perfect. And I want to come back to that because I think it's a big area. The sort of, particularly the unsolicited, qualitative, informal feedback that flows into most organizations on a daily, weekly, hourly kind of basis. That because I think it's a big area. But before we get to that, we have to deal with hand grenade management. Let's call it, because you recently provided me with a guest post. We were talking about this kind of before in the setup to this. You provided me with a guest post for my site called Obituary, the Survey, in brackets 1920s to 2023. And I posted it on my site and I subsequently shared it on LinkedIn. And I knew it was going to be a bit of like, pull the pin out of the hand grenade, chuck it over the wall, then see what happens. And since that, it's been live, and it went live in the third week in June, and now at the time of recording, we're about a month later, and it's had that post has had almost 25,000 impressions, has generated over 126 reactions, 49 comments, and has been reposted 17 times. I mean, it kind of blew up. It was literally like kind of taking a baseball bat and like smashing up the kind of the hornet's nest. And
Yeah.
all the kind of the VOC kind of people, kind of like we're out in force. And so first of all, I wanted to say thank you for that. And many people were sort of going, "Oh, what a brilliantly written piece!" And I'm going, "Adrian, kudos for that." And I'm like, "No, it's not me. I wish I'd written it, but I didn't." And Nate wrote it, and I thought it was brilliant. And that's why I posted it. But first of all, so thank you for that. Thank you for allowing me to kind of like to shake things up a little bit. And but secondly, to clue people in that haven't seen the post and are now not going kind of like away trying to find it to read it, we'll put a link to it in the show notes so people can kind of find it. But can you give me a synopsis of the post and also kind of what was the inspiration behind it? Because it's quite a statement piece, kind of writing an obituary for the survey. But I just thought that was just brilliant. So, but it's also kind of like beautifully written and stuff as well, and with a lot of historical references. And so it actually kind of felt kind of quite heavy, quite robust sort of thing. But it was like firmly tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of what made it kind of like so brilliant. So anyway, give us a bit of a background on it.
Yeah, you're right. It was cheeky. And first of all, thanks for sharing it on your platform and for giving us the opportunity to be able to share some of our thoughts on that and have the discussions. But yeah, it's this fun, cheeky personification of the survey. And the way that it came about was we were working with one of our early customers, one of the first pilot customers that we ever had. And we were asking them in a quarterly business review as a part of kind of an account management practice, what are some of the effects that you're seeing that Artifact, like our company, is having? And I think this could be said with AI in general, with a lot of other folks that are starting to use this across their practice. And one of the remarks that was made was, we don't send out new surveys anymore. We don't send them out anymore because we know that there's a treasure trove of information we already have, and we're starting to utilize that more and more. And we're starting to use all the surveys we've already sent out more and more. And we just want to be able to understand what's already there. And there was a remark made that surveys are dead to us inside of that call, and that became just kind of a very fun, tongue-in-cheek, as you mentioned, reference across our company that inspired the post itself. So I think, to your point, the principles behind this is: do surveys have a place? Are they useful? Of course. Like they're such an effective tool at certain moments in time. I think what is dying and what has died and what AI is changing across this landscape for customer experience professionals and for businesses at large is the fact that relying on a survey as the only frequency touch point, as the only ability for you to be able to put a pulse on what's happening with the customer voice is gone. Mm-hmm. It's not an effective way to think about how to understand the customer voice, et cetera. And we're seeing that at an accelerated pace.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And also, but it did kick up a massive storm, and there was a huge amount, like I said before, there was like 126 reactions and about 49 different kind of comments and things. And there were some people that came out kind of in force. They were a bit like, right, jukes up.
Yep.
And they were ready for a fight. I mean, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I think some point in the future, I'll probably try and pull that together, because, it's a bit like social media, right? See, these things kind of like pass, and you actually almost have to almost like be at the bus stop to see the bus going kind of by. Because if you're not at the bus stop, the bus is still going to go by, but you're just not going to see them, right? Yeah. And so in order to try and capture that and capture some of the insight that's from the conversation, that I think I might do a bit of a sort of a wrap-up piece and build on the conversation that we're having kind of here. But I wondered if you could tell me, what did that whole flaming out kind of heated discussion kind of tell you about where we're at with surveys, data, and insight? And also kind of like, was there anything in particular that stood out for you in all of that melee?
Yeah, I think on the positive side, I think I saw a couple things. I think I saw just how impassioned the CX community and how impassioned enterprises are about understanding the voice of the customer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we didn't have any reaction to this, I think I would be actually concerned. Right? Like that the programs and the methods that we have invested so heavily in all of a sudden and increasingly becoming irrelevant. I think if there was no reaction to that, I'd be concerned. So I think I loved seeing the tenacity and obviously this attachment to what we're all passionate about, which is understanding the voice of the customer. I think it's becoming clear based on the conversations, the discussion, the responses that I had from this, that there's some inhibition about the fact that survey programs can be controlled, piloted, and implemented from non-technical individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that if you need and can use AI to be able to do this, it might require some cross-functional collaboration, some fighting for budget, some persuasion, some business cases. And I think that's also clear. The fact that like we're probably just not ready for the cross-functional collaboration that's going to be needed across the entire business to be able to bring in all of this different data that is not just survey data. So that's one aspect. And then the last is I think there's an enormous amount of investment that has gone into survey programs. And I think there's some white knuckled behavior around the fact that we just got this implemented. It's been a year, it's been 3 years, whatever it is, right? And I fought hard to be able to get this in place. And I think there's a little bit of fear around the fact that like, if I just did this, do I really have to reinvent this program that I fought for so aggressively? So I think there's some emotions around that are clear as well. Yeah, I think those can be resolved in time.
Do you think also that there might be people might feel slightly threatened that you might be trying to wean them off their addiction to certain kind of metrics, and you might go, actually, that might be your kind of like fix of choice, but actually that might not be the best way.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about the fact that we've had these really wonderful quantitative scalers, you know, your Likerts, your bullets and options, and the different abilities to be able to actually make sense of what's going on with the customer in a more decisively calculated way. And if we now want to be able to depend on the actual open text aspect and rely on something that isn't us, that's not our own devices, I do think there is a little bit of uncomfortability and maybe in distrust with the fact that we're going to lose the metric, we're going to lose the number, we're going to lose the guidepost. We maybe, even if we don't really know that those guideposts are the most effective way to be able to get us towards this North Star that we're headed towards, I do think there's some fear there.
Yeah. But the precursor to all of this, which I thought which was interesting, is something you alluded to earlier, was this idea that of the existence, and it's always been, I should preface this by saying it's always been the case and been a hard technological problem to crack, is my understanding. That the idea that an organization receives all sorts of qualitative feedback, which is unsolicited and informal, and it comes through all sorts of different channels, whether it's and including face-to-face, phone, emails, messaging channels, whatever it might be. Even kind of you can add in social media to that, but that tends to get covered by some of the most of the listening kind of tools, many of the existing kind of listening, the VOC listening tools right now. And that really resonated with me because I'd done a project with an organization, and one of the projects was that we were sort of exploring about how they use feedback and how they learn from customers, and we were having a discussion about, well, do customers tell you things that don't show up in your surveys? And anecdotally, they were going, yeah, all the time. And what do you do with that? Well, it depends. Right. And so we thought, well, actually, why don't we just do an internal survey, kind of like to establish the extent of that and to understand kind of like the variety of different approaches of what people do with that. And what was remarkable when we looked at speaking to all of the kind of almost the customer facing people, not the people in service, but the more the account manager, sales kind of folks.
Yeah.
They were overwhelmingly saying, yeah, we get that all the time, like a daily, weekly kind of basis. And it's emails and phone calls and all these different sort of things, meetings and stuff. And I was like, what do you do with it? Well, it depends. Sometimes I jot it down in a notebook. Sometimes I put it in a spreadsheet. Sometimes I just share it with my team or forward an email on kind of whatever. But like, you don't centralize it, you don't share it widely. It's not there pooled to be analyzed or kind of like tagged to anything or classified or anything. No. And so we did the big project. We established this. It was like, and then shared it around and thought about what we're doing. And then it led to, they're currently operating on Salesforce. And so it led to a big sort of Salesforce kind of like, I feel like swimming pool development where you could pull all this sort of stuff in and then you can actually start to figure out kind of what it related to and who it was relevant for and so on and so forth. And then you can start to build up that basis to be able to do some analysis around it, spot some trends, kind of timestamp it, all these different sort of things. And also come back to it kind of later and being able to refer to it. So you said this and we did that and this is what's happened. And so that's one of the things that when we initially started talking, we were talking about this and I was a bit like, yes. So I'm going to stop there because I'm going to say my point was, it doesn't seem to me that companies, they don't necessarily need more insight or feedback data. They actually just need to focus in on what they actually already have, and particularly the unstructured kind of data. I mean, because, can you give us an idea of like, from your experience, the sort of quantum we're dealing with in terms of like, if you're getting 10% of it is formal feedback data or X amount of feedback data, what's the other big bubble that we're not even seeing?
Yeah. So to answer that last question on the nose, the sampling and I would say the proration that we typically see across all of our customers is that survey data makes under 10% of all the unstructured data and the response that you get from your customer. So there's an enormous amount of information that is coming in through, if you're a B2B company, sales calls that is coming in through, support tickets, the call center, customer interviews, and of course your surveys, review data that's public and available and things like that. So there's just an enormous amount, and that is capable. Like there are technologies that are capable of actually combing through that to be able to extract what is most important, what isn't noise, because that's obviously usually the concern.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you mentioned that is really interesting is like that evolution. It's almost like you can watch predictably what happened, right? We sent out surveys and we say, okay, we're just not getting data frequently enough. Okay, well, let's send out more surveys. And so we send them out daily or weekly or whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is that like a survey is still an isolated snapshot of a single stateful representation of what happened with the customer. And that there is an enormous amount of data outside of that single touch point that is actually an ongoing evolution of what's happening every single day that has ebbs, flows, crests and troughs of what's happening with the customer at all points of your customer journey at all times.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. So, I mean, that's great. I mean, it shows you that kind of the quantum that we're dealing with. So we're only actually kind of capturing, small double-digit number of kind of what is possible in terms of, or what is available to us. And actually there's this huge, possibly up to like 90% of kind of data that's there that is feedback rich that we could be tapping into, but we're not currently.
Yep.
But it can be kind of like, it can be mined and analyzed. I mean, so tell me a bit more about what you're doing and what you're proposing as an alternative with kind of Artifact, because I think that's where we can start to kind of think about what should be happening and where people, because this is 90%, you're like, oh crumbs, where do I get started with that? What's the alternative? What's kind of, what is good look like?
Yeah. And I'm going to try and split my remarks up into kind of two categories. So first of which is like, what is Artifact doing? What are we trying to do there? But also like, what do we advocate every organization does? Even if you're not using Artifact, I want to try and address that part too. As far as Artifact, we have built this wealth and spread of data connectors that can integrate into almost every single qualitative unstructured data point that you have, and frankly, almost every quantitative and transactional data point that you have. And so we centralize this through OAuth authentication or API keys. We do a historical sync of all of that data that spans the entire customer journey. And we do identity resolution. So we map every single interaction or moment that you have with a customer back to the same customer, to the same account. And then we use artificial intelligence to be able to do two things, one of which is topic modeling. Mm-hmm. And we built a really unique topic model that gives you these verbose phrases that are measured, quantified, that you can understand and slice and dice and see what's happening with the customer experience across that. And then the second is event detection. So our ability to use AI to be able to detect things like anomalies, trends, emerging themes. And so every single day you have this wealth of tools to be able to come in, measure directly what is the customer saying, how does that relate back to our business initiatives, to be able to kind of move through the data and do discovery and understand what's going on there. So that's kind of the alternative. Is we are very convinced, along with some of the emerging competitors that we've seen, that there's a new category of how people think about customer data in general. Mm-hmm. And that we'll use AI to be able to power all the customer facing teams across the business to be able to make better customer decisions. The thing that I think any business can start to be able to act on and get value from, there's one thing that I think stands out of that second category that's really interesting is data hygienics. Mm-hmm. And when we look at people's data lake initiatives, it's striking how many organizations don't think about their unstructured qualitative data as a part of that initiative. Mm-hmm. The amount of times that we've gone in and we've seen Salesforce, ERP data, transactional event data, and that's it inside of a data lake. And there's no customer support tickets coming in. There's no survey results coming in. There's no sales calls from Gong or Chorus or whatever it is coming in, right? Mm-hmm. All of these other touch points that are actually really interesting. That's a low-hanging fruit, is for companies to be able to actually integrate all of that customer data. And as technology progresses, it'll just make it incredibly, just the bar to entry to be able to use that data is going to become much easier. So whatever initiatives are deprioritizing bringing in that data inside of an organization, I would start kicking against that. I would start prioritizing as aggressively as I could to be able to get all of our customer data into the data lake if you have those initiatives. So that's the first part is data hygienics, is making sure that we have this prioritized and coming in.
Sorry, I'd possibly go before you get into the second bit. I mean, I'd probably go further on that, and I'd probably go kind of like and just almost say take it up a level, because I would suggest that some of the people might be going, data hygienics, and that sounds a little bit nerdy, possibly and a bit technical. But if you want to kind of cause, to get people thinking,
yep,
is to start by saying, do we receive unsolicited, informal, qualitative feedback from our customers? And if so, how so? And what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Discuss.
Yeah. That is a wonderful tailoring to that. Establishing, is there value in this other data that isn't inside of here, right? Yeah. I think there is, similar to the distrust you were talking about earlier of like the metric aspect of, are we afraid that we're going to lose the metric? Do we have distrust around the fact that there might not be a better way? I also think it's obvious that there is, with increasing awareness of AI and the advancements, there's also just general distrust in its abilities. Mm-hmm. I think that's driven by a couple of things, one of which is, just awareness around how do you utilize it? How do you fine tune it? How do you get it to be able to accomplish tasks in a predictably successful way? Mm-hmm. And I think there are things around, AI trust. There's things around what skill sets and time and availability do we have that I think make in cloud that question that you just asked. It's like, is there actually value in this other data? And I think this ability of, could we even use it? Can even cloud that question for you, right?
Yeah. I mean, because it's like, if you acknowledge that it's there, then it's there. It's like the genie's out of the bottle. It's like going, we know it's there. now we're making a conscious decision either to do something about it or ignore it. But at least we're kind of like we're not going to get blindsided about it, because it's just almost shining a light and going, this happens.
Yep.
The question is it of value? Can we do anything with it?
Yep.
And then we'll get into that. But you were going to make a second point. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's just generally more around the AI aspect as well. As I'm encouraging everyone just to be able to get exposed to what's happening inside of AI, like experiment with it, learn about it, read about it, like understand what's actually possible, how to be able to utilize these models to be able to, see yourself be successful with them. We've seen a number of customers come to Artifact. One of the folks that we've really enjoyed working with, his name is Neville. He's a CX leader at Wayfair. And as we've been working with him through a proof of concept and early stages of working with that company, one of the things that's been clear is that his interest in AI and his questions that he was asking himself is what drove him to go look and evaluate vendors. It was this, man, like there's a lot happening here. How could we use this? And his exploration, his curiosity is going to help that company in a lot of different ways. And I'm excited for folks that are thinking that way.
Awesome. Nate, maybe to kind of bring this to reality, because actually, I mean, what I wanted to ask you was like, do you have a couple of sort of like, say, client examples or examples of clients that you've worked with? Now, if you can share who they are and what they do, that'd be great. If not, then just kind of describe kind of around the edges and sort of thing to help us understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and what sort of outcomes they've been able to achieve, because then it brings this whole thing to life, because otherwise it becomes like, it's a nice thing, but just sort of in reality, it means nothing. But to prove like, here's what some people have gone, ooh, and this is, they've noticed it, they've done something about it, and here's what they've been able to achieve. So that'd be great if you could do that.
Yeah. So the first company that comes to my mind is one of our clients, Pura. And Pura makes an IoT scent device. The best mental model to have around it is it's like a Wi-Fi connected Glade plugin. Is a good way to kind of model what it does.
Okay.
So you control it from your phone, control the different scents that are available to it and things like that. It's a neat device. And one of the things that they used and that they've mentioned Artifact has helped them to do is kind of escape this disposition trap of the fact that the only time that they really had context around what was going on in customer service data or outside of their own customer interviews was during this tag or disposition report that came, usually once a month. So they'd have, support come in, give them the tag report, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So now that entire team with Artifact has this ability to be able to see what are the trending or anomalistic issues or problems or oppuRtunities every single day at 9 a.m. And they've been watching that religiously to be able to understand what can we go do for our customers. So an example of how they got value from that. They had a new version of their diffuser that they had shipped out to customers. And they saw a topic inside of Artifact that said, my Wi-Fi or my diffuser keeps disconnecting from the Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. And they saw an anomalous spike. It had suddenly spiked up and had started to trend away from even that spike afterwards. And it didn't show up in their observability data. They didn't have any, error logs or bug logs around what was going on with it. So there were no clear normal or I would say heuristical patterns of how they could evaluate what's going on with this issue. So they saw the spike inside of Artifact. They started looking at specifically which customers it was affecting. And one of the product managers sat shoulder to shoulder with the head of engineering for about 3 or 4 hours and started evaluating the commonalities of what those users had across each other. And they found that everyone with over 5 diffusers inside of their home, so large homes, were having network problems. So it was just some sort of capacity that they had configured into the diffuser that they were struggling with. They're able to identify the fix, push it out really quickly, within, about 48 hours, have everything fixed. And they were able to measure directly after, did this complaint that they were seeing actually decrease, and they monitored the decrease of those mentions inside of Artifact over time.
Okay. And so were they able to do that proactively, almost by doing like a firmware update sort of thing?
Yeah. So they were able to push out the firmware updates, and because it's a Wi-Fi enabled device, all the devices inside the home, either through cellular, which they can do, or Bluetooth rather, through an initial sync, they can send, hey, there's an update for your diffusers.
Okay.
So the interesting thing there is how they articulated it to us is we find out about problems and issues before support ever has a chance to tell us. Like that's a really great thing, not only for product, but also for support. Right. That support doesn't have to be in this business of this cost center based business of like, here's the problems, hope you fix them. Instead, it can be this brokering of, okay, we both see the exact same data. We both saw it at the exact same time. How do we work together to be able to proactively solve this problem for the customer, to communicate it, to troubleshoot it, and get it fixed out?
So help me understand how that what sort of channels did they plug in, or what channels were they monitoring to be able to to find that if it hadn't hit support already? Or is it that it hit support, but it was so diffuse that they actually couldn't see that it was actually a big issue, because it was like they've got this, you're getting the odd kind of query coming in here, but actually you were able to kind of lump it all together? Or like, tell me how it actually kind of like worked.
So a combination of both of that you just mentioned. The first of which is there was diverse channels. So they had survey responses coming in from SurveyMonkey. They had a lot of different channels for their help desk system. So like SMS, email, as well as like an in-app chat and aspects like that. So they had diverse channels that were actually fragmenting the anomaly itself across many channels. And then the second was the fact that normally it takes the amount of time it took to be able to actually see the nominal value actually increase would have been, I bet you, as we were looking at the trend with them as they were showing it to us, it probably would have taken a week or 2 weeks for support to say, this is a suspicious amount of volume and we need to take this to the product team. Mm-hmm. But because we started to see this take off from 1 or 2 mentions to 10 and then 10 to 100, it was just a lot easier for our system to be able to detect what was happening across many support reps, rather than this amalgamation of folks coming together and saying there's a real problem here over a large volume. Yeah. So early detection, essentially.
Awesome. And I can imagine how that would work in terms of, particularly when you have organizations that sometimes structure their service and support teams around specialization across kind of channels, and you have distinct teams that are spread out, and they're all getting different minutes. A little bit here and a little bit here, but when you aggregate it all up, it's like going
yeah,
and that takes a while sometimes to cycle through into that overall sort of like macro sort of view.
Yeah. The thing that the thing I love about that particular case study is the cross-functionality aspect. They're a team that already values it, but the ability for them to be able to start to work together across many different departments is something I'm personally very passionate about, and it's a part of our company mission. One of the things that has been just completely maddening to me as a practitioner, I think you and I have actually talked about this before, is when I was a product manager, I would watch myself and I would watch my peers. There would be a support person that would come to us, and a wonderful rep all the time, right? It's usually a high performing rep, and they would come and say, Nate or so-and-so, I just talked to 10 people. They all said that this is a problem. Like, I just wanted you to be aware of it. And the product manager response is usually, that's like 10 people. It's anecdotal. Mm-hmm. It's not really data. Like, come back to me when you have real data. And then as a product manager, I would have the audacity to go do 10 customer interviews. And then I would make a $500,000 product decision off of those 10 interviews with no sort of awareness of the cognitive dissonance that those 10 people are as important as these 10 people. And you can argue qualitative research rigor as much as you want. I am a huge advocate for that rigor. I'm very good at it. But the fact of the matter is that the customer voice is a customer voice, and dismissing it just because it didn't come from your interview, it just drives me nuts. So
it's also about respect, right?
Yeah.
and actually kind of saying, well, it's almost like a democratic kind of way. It doesn't matter kind of like how many coins you've got in your pocket. A vote should be a vote, and it has
Yeah.
equal weight and power, all sort of districting and regions and things aside, but it's like, in the purest terms, one person, kind of one voice, and it should be equally kind of like listened to and heard and respected. And so, yeah, it's a good point. But anyway,
yeah,
let's not get into the whys and wherefores of successes and failings of democracy. Do you have another client example that you can share before we kind of like get out of the weeds a little bit and we can do some wrap up sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, one last one. One of our newer clients, Siete Family Foods, they make products I'm actually a really big fan of as well. So they make chips, salsas, dips, just a variety of different Latin foods that are wonderful. And they sell at a number of very large big box retailers across the United States. And one of the things that they have started to be able to use Artifact for is really the specificity aspect. That's one of the things that they really love about Artifact, is the fact that rather than seeing like a big category or something you usually see inside of text analytics, like chips or like chips bag, it's incredibly hard to know, what do I do with that information? Whereas with Artifact, we're able to see the bag of chips that I bought from Costco has been mostly broken the last 3 times I bought it. Like, right. That's a very contextual phrase. And if you're able to model the fact that many people have said that exact same thing, it's incredibly actionable to be able to take that information and go do something about it, to understand the frequency, when it happens, how it happens. And so that's one of the things that they're doing, is using the specificity of the topic model to be able to make these insights more actionable, rather than just broad sweeping categorical tags that are hard to be able to action and set strategy around. Yeah.
So I think that what I will do is just there with that, because I know that there's some people that we listen to this and go like, oh yeah, we do that. Because we get the kind of the open comment sort of box that comes with our service. So we've got that kind of handled, and we're like going, that's an ingredient in this cake that you're making. That's kind of possibly one bit, but you've got all these other bits, other channels, other sources, other kind of bits and pieces that you can plug into it, which makes that body of data much richer.
Yeah.
And gives you a greater, I guess, granularity, possibly insights, validation of some of the stuff that's showing in your service. Because actually, surveys are often biased in the way that people that have something to say are predisposed to taking the surveys more often than not. I.e., they've got something great to say about it or something bad to say about it. Yep. And actually, there's value in that kind of middle kind of bit, which might be kind of 80-90% of kind of what you do, but it's all those little kind of things that I think is the really important sort of part of it. But so, yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, because that gives a slightly different sort of view on it. But Nate, is there anything else that you want to add that you've missed out that you want to highlight before we kind of ask you, we zoom out a little bit and we ask you kind of some wrap up questions?
I don't think so. Yeah, it's been really fun so far around these different topics so far. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So here's the thing. Wanted just to boil it all down and ask Nate Sanders to complete this sentence.
Okay.
So if in order to your best advice to someone listening into this that wants to improve their customer and or employee experience, Nate Sanders says, do this, ... Complete that sentence in parentheses, obviously. And you would complete the sentence by saying,
centralize every customer conversation and do the hard work to be able to understand and measure it. It's obviously biased towards what we do at Artifact. I get it. But I have felt the pain as a practitioner myself for 10 years. It is so difficult. I know that even doing it manually takes an enormous amount of effort. But there is a power across an entire business, across multiple departments, like we've talked about, an accuracy, an actionability that comes from doing it that's unmatched.
I mean, I would say that again, I would go back to that sort of thing. It's like if you're on that kind of journey that you're wedded to, well, you're not wedded to, you are an avid user of surveys and so on and so forth. But you're thinking about actually, can there be more? Then you and ask you to entertain the idea of, does your organization receive this qualitative, informal, unsolicited qualitative feedback? And if the answer is yeah, go and find out. Ask people.
Yeah.
You don't really kind of have to answer the question. Just go and ask people, do we do that? Do we get that? What do we do with that?
Yep.
Because you will be surprised of how many people, I guarantee you'll be surprised about how many people, you will know this in your bones. But when you go and ask people, they will tell you, and you'll be like, what? And then then you can go, we need to do something about that. And we need to do exactly kind of what Nate says, is we need to think about how do we centralize it to be able to think about it, to analyze it, and then to act on it. Because I think this is one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, is that oftentimes technology and the implementation thereof the technology is not the problem. All of the tools are there in the shed.
Yep.
Right. And the problem is how do we change what we do and how we think about things and how we move other people to that kind of, to do different sort of things. And so I think we can rely on the technology to help us kind of do that, because I think it's advancing at a faster rate than we ourselves are advancing in terms of how we can change our organizations and keep up with keep up with customer demand and changing preferences and all these different things. But so I would encourage people listening just to go and find out, go and talk to people, ask them if this exists. What do we do about it? And what should we be doing about it? And what can we learn from it?
There's also, like, one of the things that came into my mind, we were talking about this twice now during the podcast, right? Is there's also like a recency bias that I think the tenured folks on a team often have around these problems, issues, opportunities, or just what happens inside of the product or the service, which is you might have a customer success manager, a support rep, a product manager that says, look, I understand what all the issues are. I think what an interesting follow-up question to the question that you asked would be, how long did it take you to become an expert on that?
Mm-hmm.
What was the timeline that it took you to be able to actually get up to speed to understand what are the big problems, the different opportunities? And it's usually, I've yet to see it not be a non-trivial amount of time, months, if not a year or plus, right? And I think the question for me is, like, if you could lower the barrier to entry to every single new onboard to be able to understand this within a week, what effect would that have? If you take this person's domain knowledge that they had to work for months, if not over a year, to be able to obtain, if you could lower that to days, what effect would that have on your ability to improve the customer experience, to serve the customer?
Sure. Yeah. Perfect. So thank you for that. Now let's zoom out a little bit. A couple of questions just to kind of wrap up that I've always been asking. I've always been asking people now. I think the first one is about what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to CX. Now, like I explained to you before we got started, that I've reached 188 different unique words and phrases for this.
Yeah. I
think I'm going to keep going until it gets 200. Then I'm going to draw a line under it and be like going, yeah, we're done. 200 is enough. But the gauntlet is laid down, Nate. What one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to CX?
The word that consistently comes to my mind around this is permissionless. The fact that some of the most interesting...
Hang on, before you kind of explain, let me just kind of like check.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm pleased to say he shoots, he scores. I'm going to make a note. I'm going to write that down. But please go ahead. Explain to me why permissionless.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, I think some of the most interesting folks I've ever worked with that are also the most productive and have the most impact are folks that didn't wait to ask for permission to be able to go try, experiment, do, act, etc. They saw a problem and they just started assuming the authority to go and solve that problem themselves. I know that, it can be a privileged statement sometimes to be able to say that you may not want to work in an organization that, doesn't allot you that freedom. I totally understand that. But I also think that there are more organizations than not that actually want you to make a recommendation, that want you to go chase these opportunities in a permissionless way and just go do and try. And it's easier to complain about the problems. It's easier to, say, I wish we did this. But those folks that just, middle finger to the world and just go do stuff. I love it. I love working with folks like that. And I think that is a very punk way to approach CX.
Absolutely. That's perfect. I love that. And so the follow-up that first question was related to the Punk CX book. Now, the follow-up book to that was Punk XL, which is it posited that that it's no longer sufficient to talk about customer experience in isolation, and we have to think about it in a more joined-up way that encompasses employee and stakeholder and business and customer and all of these different things. And that's actually the XL stands for experience leadership, and we need to talk about what that means in that holistic, integrated, systemic way, because we talk about brand leadership, and we talk about technological leadership, and we talk about market leadership, but we don't really talk about experience leadership. And if that's the sort of the competitive frame or game, as it were, then we sort of need to start, right? And so rather than actually telling people and defining what that means, I've been asking people to pick a company or brand that they think is like an experienced leader, as it were, and who's like in terms of raising the bar. So do you have an idea of an organization in mind that you think is raising the bar, and also why?
Yeah. I have two. I'll start with the first, and you can stop me on the second for time's sake if we need to. But the first example is a company called Taurus. Taurus is founded by two of my long-term mentors, Gilbert Lee and Nate Walkingshaw, that were actually the CXO and head of product at Pluralsight that I worked at before founding Artifact. And the way that they're approaching energy, sustainable energy for residential and homes, to be able to essentially enable you to become your own energy provider. They've thought through the entire customer experience in a very deliberate and thoughtful way, all the way to their first product was this flywheel-based battery. It's not, they're trying to get escape velocity from these lithium ion solid state energy batteries that are obviously have their own impact on the environment and are hard to be able to procure and get and expensive, and just rethought the entire problem. Utilize technology that has actually been around since the 70s, but wasn't really possible in a sustainably manufactured way until today. And all the way from the product to the installation to the ecosystem of the fact that I can sell my power to my neighbor who's also on Taurus. They're just thinking end to end around how do we serve the customer? What should the product be in an innovative way? And just trying to turn a lot of these assumptions on their head and doing it for the sake of the customer and the mission that they know that their customer base has. So I love that. Awesome. I think it's a hard problem to solve, but they're being very deliberate.
Nice.
The second I would say is Airbnb. I've been very impressed with Brian Chesky's explanation of how they solved some of their pricing problems over the last 6 months. They use an enormous amount of service design, cross-functionality. They brought in a lot of stakeholders and used design thinking to be able to solve a lot of those problems. And I think it's why it's always just been, regardless of whether you like staying at an Airbnb, it's always been a wonderful experience to do it. And then there was this little problem that kept sneaking up on them around pricing and fees, and they just so deliberately went through and solved that, and continue to be able to address a lot of the problems that exist there. And I've been very impressed by that. I think that's a great example of looking organizationally across the entire business. How do we actually solve this problem together in an intentional way?
Awesome. Love it. Two great examples. So one final thing before we go. I think we could probably both agree that the world is a funny place right now. And I tend to find myself trying to distract myself in the morning over my cup of coffee and try not to get kind of sucked into the doom scrolling, which just seems to be this kind of vortex that I try and escape from. Anyway, So therefore, to try and combat that, I've been asking people kind of randomly to tell me a good news story at the end of these podcasts. And so, can you tell me what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that's sort of made you smile in the last week?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier when I was talking about data that it was kind of a nerdy phrase, and I'm just kind of a nerdy guy. So one of the things that has really made me smile this week is the open sourcing of the Llama model from Meta. It's an incredibly capable model. They're thinking about the fact that there is a schism in this approach to how AI will be developed, either through open source and open methods, or through private, more closed methods, and both can have their advantages and disadvantages. And I'm just the outpouring of enthusiasm, experimentation, the excitement that I saw yesterday. Our whole team was abuzz, and it just made me happy to be able to see a lot of people thinking about creating new things with this thing that's very capable. I really like the AI community for their enthusiasm and positivity.
Awesome. That's what a great kind of like story to finish on. And I like the idea about the how I think people are open sourcing things and how the open source community have made some incredible kind of advances kind of forward through just collaborative efforts. I mean, there's the Llama models, but there's things like Kuma and stuff as well that's almost outperforming many of the the Chat GPT variants, as well as Bard and Ernie and Big Bird and all the other Sesame Street characters that are going to emerge in this kind of like LLM kind of like universe. But I think it's a great story, and I think it shows up that this is something that when you kind of open it up and you show what people can do collectively, I think it's kind of like it's brilliant. But final word, Nate, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for writing and sharing that article with me, because we chucked a hand grenade over the wall and kind of like sat back and kind of watched, and I thought it was funny. But most importantly, thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with me on the podcast today, and congratulations on your success so far with Artifact, and may it long continue.
Yeah, thank you. Honored to be here. Thank you for having me, and excited to meet again in the future, Adrian. Thanks for this.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. Do tune in again. Thanks very much.